Okay, well, it's 12 o'clock, so we'll keep letting people in, but in the interest of time, we'll go ahead and get going. So just wanted to say welcome and thank you so much for joining us for our September edition of TASP's free webinar series. I'm Chelsea Time, the Executive Director of TASP, and Betsy Mish, who's on as well, and I will be your moderator today and helping out with anything that comes up. So today we have Tom Robinson joining us to talk about building support networks to reduce the risk of isolation for parents with intellectual and developmental disabilities. So I'm just going to go through and tell you first a little bit about TASP for those of you who don't know much or anything about us. So TASP stands for the Association for Successful Parenting. We most often go by our acronym TASP, and we are a nonprofit committed to supporting families where parents have cognitive difficulties. So what that means is we work with professionals and parents, mostly through training, education, advocacy, and support to ensure that everyone has a chance to parent. So please just take a moment. You should be on our email list since you're joining this webinar today. If you're not, feel free to visit our website and join our email list. You can also pop over and like and share our Facebook page. That'll make sure that you're getting updates about additional webinars, trainings, any new resources we have, membership, and anything else that we're doing. So just a few general reminders. Everybody can keep themselves on mute. We do this in a more of a Zoom meeting format because we like it to be kind of semi-interactive when we can. So you can mute yourself. Your camera can be on or off. We are recording the webinar. We do make them available as archived webinars for our members. So if you prefer not to be on camera, just keep your camera off and keep yourself on mute. We don't provide CEs or slides, but we did share in an email earlier today, and we'll put it in the chat as well, just a PDF of this presentation that Tom is welcoming you to follow along with, take notes on as he presents. Likewise, you're welcome to put any questions in the chat as we go. Tom is very open to a more informal and interactive webinar. So if things come up as we're going through that you want to ask about, you can use the raise your hand feature or throw a question in the chat. And Betsy, Tom, or I will keep an eye out there and make sure that he sees all of those. We'll also put some links in the chat as we go. And if you're having any technical issues, feel free to pop over to Zoom and see if they can help you out. So we're going to get right to it. Like I said earlier, we have Tom Robinson with us today to talk about building support networks to reduce the risk of isolation for parents who have IDD. So Tom is the director of Thomas Robinson Consulting, founded in 1994, which provides individualized services in home communities through a family-centered team approach that promotes inclusion for individuals with developmental delays or disabilities in Northwest British Columbia, Canada. So Tom has worked in this field for over 40 years, and he has a tremendous amount of experience both with individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities and working in rural communities. So I'm going to go ahead and stop my share and pass it over to you, Tom.
Okay, thank you. And welcome. What I'd like to do, many times when I do a training, I will have each person do a quick introduction. There are too many of us, so we're not going to do that. But what I'd like to do and share that with you, the results of a poll, just to give us a sense of who our group is today and as to what your backgrounds are. So that poll is about to be set up for you, and if you could join in, that'd be wonderful. And then we'll share the results.
So it looks like we got most people participating in it, so hopefully everybody can see it. I think I shared it to the group.
Terrific, thank you. Okay. And are we ready to move on?
Yep, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Okay. So my approach is very, as Chelsea was saying, very interactive. I welcome your input as we go. And some of my approach in talking about the idea of building support networks is how it can affect, in particular, people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, how for them there can be some different kinds of challenges and some ideas on things we can do to maybe facilitate their successes. But the truth is support networks for any human being can be a challenge. And for many individuals where it can become particularly alarming is when there's greater isolation. And that can be especially true in some of the communities I've been working in, where you're looking at people being well outnumbered by the moose and the bears, and there just aren't as many people. There aren't as many resources either. So remote and isolated communities have their own sets of challenges. I'm going to share with you some of Rose's stories. Rose is a lady who I've worked with over the years, and she still has been living in a remote community in northern British Columbia where transportation wasn't always available. The climate could be very harsh, especially in winter time, although with summer now, with forest fires and the intense heat, it has been highly competitive with winter storms. So there are a lot of climatic conditions, there are economic factors. There were two things that mattered most to Rose. One, her culture. She, at the time of this story, maybe she was in her British, and she was a person of Indigenous heritage and took great pride in that. Connected to her heritage were family members, her family. Some family members were not always helpful to her. Actually, even no kind way to say this, predatory. But then it didn't matter, Rose. I mean, it was her family is family, and that was dominant. She was the mother of two girls. Nobody knows exactly when this happened. She was living, again, in a small, remote community, the local grocery store. And she was eligible for food vouchers, which at that time were available to her. And she would go to the grocery store with her food vouchers, and no one knows when something happened in the store that really changed things for her. There were probably maybe 8 to 10 regular cappers who she would encounter at different times. She'd know when certain people would be there. She'd go with her vouchers, and Rose had a lot of difficulty with calculating money. Really difficult for her. Math was not a strong area for her. And she would come in with her vouchers, grocery cart would be full. And at one point, and we don't know who did this, a cashier would begin talking with Rose and say, "What, Rose, you don't have quite enough here. Maybe we can put something back. Like, what do you think? I know your daughters really like these cookies." And this, again, the familiarity that occurs in a grocery store, I think we've all experienced it. You get to know people's names sometimes. You get to know a little bit about, especially children can be a great connector. Go to the same schools, so-and-so's, your so-and-so's mother or father. That kind of thing was very common. But what wasn't common was holding up the line. People don't tend to take kindly to that. but they tolerated it. And it was because of the cashier. And she simply was kind to Rose and said, hey, maybe you don't need 2 bags of cookies. What do you think? What's your daughter's favorite? What do they like best? The peanut butter or the ginger? It was a negotiation. And what is startling is people on the line didn't complain. True story. What also changed was every one of those cashiers began doing the same thing, the same kind of negotiation, the same kindness, the same connecting, where it became part of the store's culture. And that created a ripple effect that went into the community. There were people who'd be in line and they'd see Rose there and they talked with her. Or hearing her name, they'd see her on the street and call her by name. Rose, how are your daughters doing? How's it going? What are you doing on the weekend with them? Her identity had changed. She was no longer the person who had and did have, still does, an intellectual disability and a significant mental health diagnosis. She was not being referred to, as she probably had been in the community, as the crazy woman. She was being identified as a mother. As a mother. And the ripple effect continued. A couple of people would connect with her again on the street and say, hey, we've got a, once you said you liked reading the Bible, and we're starting a Bible study group. Would you like to be part of that? Okay. And if it's hard for you to get out, you don't have any transportation, we could even come to your home and do it. We could come and they would come and they bring cookies and they bring refreshments and they sit as a small group and they talk about the Bible. And that connected to Rose's faith. Her language comprehension, as she read, wasn't terribly good, but people were there. It didn't matter. It was like they were there, and she got comfort from that. And they were helping her feel less lonely. And it's something that did credit to that community. And then at one point, too, it went even further. Somebody was saying to her, you like to clean. We see that you like to clean, and you don't have a job. I have a friend who needs someone to come and clean their office, maybe once a week for an hour. What do you think? I could come help you with it, and help you learn how to do that. And she was hired, did that job for 5 years. It was the first job she'd ever had. Happy story for the most part. There's social support networks. And there can be different definitions. One I like is from Forrester, Jones, and Gant, and opportunity structure. The word opportunity. You can't guarantee a support network. What a support network can be is enhance the likelihood of opportunities for social connection and reduce isolation. It's about interpersonal relationships. That's what it's about. It can comprise a range of people, and we have to look at it really broadly. It can be family, it can be friends, acquaintances, neighbors, and also professionals and others. It's interesting. You think about your day or your week, all different people you encounter, and some you know by name. And over time, especially in small communities, I've found that you get to know people with those regular contacts. When the contacts are less frequent, it's really hard to build on that relationship. What are the benefits of a social network? Feel better about yourself. You feel more connected. Feel part of a community. So self-esteem, and you feel included. and social inclusion is people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Historically, they've not always been included or expected to be included. We have to consider with social support networks, simply, we're not talking about a luxury here. It's a human need, the need to have that affiliation, the need to have that connection to others, and ideally in as positive a way as possible. It enhances skills, and it can enhance one's own identity, one's own sense of who they are. Each person typically has a combination of formal and informal supports. For simplicity, I'm going to define formal supports as people who are paid to be in your life. They're there because it's either through a contract or an agreement in terms of some form of compensation. That's the connecting force. An informal support group, people are there by their own choice and yours. They're there to because they want to be there. They don't have to be there. There's no contractual obligation, not typically. So there's a difference. And one tends to have more staying power than the other. Informal supports can last very, very, very long time. Formal supports may be time limited. Okay. So what are the implications for people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities? I'm going to make a reference to Robin Dunbar, who's written a book, and he's done a number of studies in this area. And one of his books is simply titled, "How Many Friends Does One Person Need?" He has a number, Dunbar's number. So for the average person, and the way they arrived at this, the first study was Christmas cards. So how many Christmas cards? How many different people were connected to that Christmas card? So it's a family of 5, even 5 times. And how we use the word friend, these people who are being identified as friends. The number for the average person, 150. For people who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, Forrester, Jones, and Gant came up with a different number, dramatically different number, 22. And that was from a group of 213 people. So there's a big gap there, and it helps if we can understand it and determine what's behind those differences. One of the things we have to look at that has, I think, changed a great deal, there'd be more research on this, I think, every day, is around technology. And let's look at social media. So many of the individuals I've worked with who are parents who have IDD, they know a lot more than I do about technology. And they're usually right at cutting edge. When something new is happening, or the latest iPhone or iPad, or they can talk very knowingly about it. And I noticed more than one occasion when I said, I'm having a problem with my connection, or why is it doing this? and more often than not, they'll look and say, oh yeah, okay, give it to me, I'll show you here. Boom, 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 and it's done. What I've noticed with many people, again, who have IDD, who may difficulty with employment and difficulty with some other cognitive areas, they can make me feel really dumb. And what is the motivation for that? Think about social media. If you're on social media, you're on Facebook, or you're connecting through email, there's inequality. You're not being identified primarily by a diagnosis. You're not being identified by your what you can't do, what someone perceives you can't do. You're just Joe, Sally on the net, and you're connecting with people. So I think the numbers can change. I've known several individuals who have IDD or parents, and they, like a lot of us, can spend a lot of time on social media making those connections. Now, there also are risks, and sometimes you can be ripe for exploitation. So a woman who I worked with over the years, she had 4 children, and they weren't always in her care, but she had regular contact with them. And her children were tremendously important to her, but she also was lonely. And there were a couple of fathers involved who she had minimal contact with, and she just wanted to have a relationship with the gentleman, and went on the internet to try to make that happen. And you have to understand that people who are involved in providing care to her, the support providers, could be a little judgmental. That you don't want to connect with that person. And the more they said, don't do this, the more she would do it, because she saw dating sites as an opportunity to find a boyfriend, what you want. And she at one point connected with a gentleman in a country in Africa, she thought. And at his request, she began to send him money. And her hope was he would come to live with her in her very small community in northern British Columbia. And he kept saying he that was his intent, and they'd be together, and they would marry, and she'd send him more money and more money. And the more staff tried to be protective and guide her on that, the more resistant she got. He's the one, I have found him. So there is that risk. I know one of the areas to, I'm not sure about how many resources are available in the US and certain states or other countries. I know in British Columbia, in terms of helping people understand how to make better choices around internet use and internet safety. The Community Living BC has something available online that can be utilized by individuals who have IDD, and sometimes with support, or sometimes simply to on their own, and that can be helpful. So when we talk about social media use, it can be wonderful in many ways, but also there can be a thorny side to it too that can be addressed. So the sense of the awareness of risk is not always fully understood. So again, there's teaching that can be developed. And again, you want to build that trust. You don't want to say, well, you can't do this. You can't talk to somebody from another country. That's stupid. Why are you doing that? That's not the approach to take. Build trust. Talk about it. Well, have you thought about, this could happen, or how this could happen? And I just seeing that there's a note in chat from Kathy, who's talking about a resource that could be available in the area that I'm talking about, which would be good. So something to be conscious of. And I know a lot of service providers in the DD field are aware of the need there, and have done some really good work in trying to overcome those barriers. We have to look back to a little bit here on the history of how people with intellectual and developmental disabilities have been treated. There was a community belief that society needed to be protected from them. And this goes back, it still lingers, it's still there, but it wasn't as much right now. It's not as much social policy. There's still are legitimate concerns about segregation and exclusion. But the idea being, let's protect society and let's protect individuals with disabilities, because they can risk of exploitation and harm, and we don't want that to happen. I know in much of my career, when I was going to university, there was still this talk about some individuals who I worked with, that, well, of course they can't have families. You know, they've got a family, they've got a mother and a father, and they may have aunts and uncles and siblings, but they're not going to marry. They're not going to. They're not going to. Are you kidding me? They're going to have children? That's not going to happen. Well, one of the turning points I saw, and some of it goes back to just the concept of normalization, and again, creating equality of opportunity, was in the 1980s with the People First movement. And I attended, I think it was the first conference in Toronto, and it was an eye-opener. It was really interesting because you saw a lot of service providers present who had some of these beliefs, all the can'ts, you can't do that, you can't do that, that's not going to happen. And listening to adults, and really listening to them, adults who would go to open mics and say, tell you about my experience. This is how I've been treated. I want to have a husband or a wife. I want to have children. And this is where you can help me. And so for the service providers, so the professionals hearing this, were I think a little bit stunned at first. Whoa, didn't know you felt that way. Yes, because a lot of the service provision wasn't possible for couples, wasn't there to facilitate their ability, not just ability, but their opportunity to have their own children if they wanted that. And so things really changed, I think, with passing years more and more dramatically. Whereas now, I like to think, and there's still a lot of work to be done, and as where task comes in too, it's like, yes, if a person chooses to have a relationship that leads to marriage, or living with someone else, and they choose to have children, that's a right. That's a right. And how to make that work, how to set them up for success. So one of the ways of enabling that kind of development is around social subgroups, either before having children and certainly after. So how do we go about doing that? Again, there are some significant risks in terms of, yes, this task website is being identified, around segregation and stigmatization that are substantial barriers. And what we see in the work we do with parents is loneliness and the risk of exploitation. So wanting to be able to help work with the parents so that those kinds of things can be minimized. Let me tell you a little bit about what makes it difficult for social support groups for parents. And in doing that, I think one of the things that we look at, from a Canadian perspective, and I think this is even universal, we look at social determinants of health, and they may have slight variations in different places. But when you're looking at it for parents, and certainly where I've worked, areas I've worked in British Columbia, you're looking at Indigenous status. You're looking at, does a person have a disability? You're looking at early life factors for that adult. You're looking at education, employment, food security or insecurity, access to health services, and gender inequality. That's a list. You might be able to add a couple things to that list, but those are the key ones. Let me tell you about Josie. Josie was 16 when she went to a doctor who said, Josie, I think you're pregnant. I can't be. Hasn't happened. It can't be pregnant. She was 16 years old. That's another potential risk factor. A teenager who very innocent in some ways, in other ways not, and lived with her family. There had been history of abuse, physical, emotional, and so their family. Family's important. And when her child was born, one of the things Josie discovered was, in terms of building a social support group, was she would go to the service provider, who was very accommodating. They had a drop-in service, and you could go there. There was a kitchen. You could meet other individuals, and many of the individuals who received those services were Indigenous, as Josie was, and they would connect. They'd talk about life, talk about different things. They'd also cook, make food to take home, and learn some life skills. Her child, when born shortly after, was taken into care by the Child Protection Agency, and Josie was always a pretty, and is pretty volatile individual. You always knew where you stood with her. She'd let you know what she thought, and there was a lot of anger. And before I take her to court, I'm going to mention one other thing. What she also discovers, when you have a baby, you become the center of attention. And Josie just beamed. She'd bring her baby to the drop-in, people congregate. That's the cutest baby we've ever seen. And she just would beam. It's great. But she also discovered an opportunity to have respite. So you got to learn this, that if she asked you to hold the baby, you'd be holding the baby, look up to hand it back to her, and she was gone. she hadn't left the building, but she was gone. She was taking a break. But that was something she learned. But also, again, the tension that went with that was positive. But when she went to court, she was very, very angry. And her presence in court was, she, again, let you know what she was thinking. She could be loud, she could be vulgar. And she began to identify that she was having some physical issues. And some of the professionals found that inconvenient. It's like, yeah, right. Not that you're under any stress here, but as a young single mom, under tremendous stress, and it was beginning to affect her physically. Escorted back into the court, and it was clearly uncomfortable for her. And I believe one of the lawyers said, "Look, buck up. This is a very sacred place, and you can't be behaving this way." The lawyer was interrupted by the judge. He said, "Wait a minute. It's okay, dear. Why don't we see if we can find a pillow for you, because your back is bothering you. You don't have to sit. You can lie here. It's okay. It's really good that you're here. It's so nice that you're part of this. And I know it's really hard for you." And that changed the tone. Changed the tone in the courtroom. And it calmed her down. And there was somebody who was looking out for her, coming from an unexpected source. And that can happen. I think one of the fundamental points I want to make today, people want to be kind. They want to be helpful. They don't always know how to do it. And for many individuals who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, they just kind of stay back, not thinking, well, I don't want to intrude. I don't know, how do you talk to people who have disabilities? It's like these missed chances. And then someone steps forward and says, "Hey, let's look at it like this. Let's treat Josie like a teenage girl who's had a baby who she loves, and she's in about as stressful a place as any human being could be right now. Let's make it easier for her." Again, judge, authority, change the tone. Everyone became a little more accommodating. Everyone became a little more willing to make it easy for her, and not just seeing the anger, not just identifying her as an angry person, but as a highly stressed young, well, girl time. So, and okay, one more part of her story, to make things safer and make it easier for her to actually live with her child. She eventually had 2 children. She moved out of her family home, and the person she moved in with, who also left the family home, was her mother. So she and her mother went to their own home and to raise both children, co-parenting, and it worked very well. So this was happening. Now, food insecurity, being able to access healthy food for herself and her children, was something that was difficult for Josie. Again, community, that there are transportation issues, really hard to get from place to place. Fresh produce, not always, depends on the time of year. And affordable. This, at the time, a young woman who's trying to better herself by taking some courses through the college to upgrade her learning, and there wasn't a lot of money. So in the community, there was a parenting group. And one of the things you have to keep in mind is when you're trying to connect parents with others, or other kinds of support groups, 2 things. One, if I go there to that place, what will others think of me? Will there be judgment? Will I be looked down upon? That's one factor. Second, who's there? Who else is there? Oh, Fifi. No, she used to tease me in school. I don't want to go there. Not Fifi's going to be there. So, fair enough. Who's going to be part of that group? And it can be difficult to overcome that. 1, stigma and being judged. 2, poor memories, people I don't want to spend time with. So it looked like this would be a good move. So one professional was saying, Josie, you have to go there. Guess what their action was? No. And that is something that you may have in your own experiences encountered many times. An adult with a parent with a developmental disability may say no, and it's like a default. Change is stressful, and I'm going to put myself at risk by going into a very situation I've been in before, or I'm not sure what it's going to feel like, so I'm going to say no, just no. A wiser professional, instead of saying, well, you have to do this, no. How could we make this easier for you? Maybe you might want to try it. Yeah, you can actually go there and they'll give you food. Actually, what they would do is have her learn how to cook certain meals that were healthy and nutritious, and she could take what she had made home with her. Sometimes would have a week's worth of food. So there was that. But they also do some teaching on child care, on infant care. And she would default to know that when you say, how could we make this work? Well, I don't know how to get there. I've got no ride. Okay. What if someone went with you? Someone you know and you feel okay with? Well, who would that be? I don't know. What about your mom? She's got a car. Would she want to go with me? And her mom said yes. And they went together. And it was a very positive experience. Josie connected with other people, other moms who were also having struggles like hers. and and tips like, have you tried this? This is something that works with my baby. Or you don't have to be quite so reactive when your child does this. It's a behavior. Here's something you could try, and go back next week. Tell me how it went. So it was a great connector. It was something that was available in the community. So all our communities are different, and sometimes the resources are there, sometimes they're not, and it's being able to take advantage of what is there, but also not trying to force a person, and trying to build enough trust where they may listen to you, and then come up with, how can we make this work? Just try it out. Now, sometimes you can try it out and go, I'm never going back there again. Fifi is just too much. She bullied me in school, I'm going to do it again. Or it turned out, I believe it turned out, Fifi wasn't even there. So the biggest risk factors when you're looking at the more isolated communities are things that we don't have total control over. I've mentioned transportation. So in one of the communities in northern BC, there have been a number of tragedies related to women hitchhiking. And there just hasn't been bus service. Greyhound was taken away. There just isn't the access. And we're talking a lot of small communities that can be interconnected, but to get from one to the other safely requires reliable transportation, and sometimes in taxi service. I mean, the community I was living in, taxi service, it lasted like 3 months and it was gone. So you had to find other ways. Sometimes that can be costly. Sometimes even family members will say, yeah, I'll give you a ride, $20 for the car. That's the phrase. And so that becomes like a taxi service. But transportation is, and sometimes the weather is so bad that the roads are closed. So you got to look at that. Poverty is a genuine reality. Small resources, very resource-based economies, and if a certain source of employment, whether it be a mill or a mine, is no longer shut down, that have a tremendous negative impact on the community. Climate, I've mentioned. If you look at things like snow and snowstorms, fire, floods, heat, those are the 4 seasons. We're not just talking about conditions, we're talking about seasons we anticipate where things can get quite dire for people. Access to healthcare services, attracting qualified professionals, comes and goes. Many times the professionals who come, the physicians, the nurse practitioners, are from other countries, and they've worked out a contract where they have to go to a more isolated community to practice. And so you look at that, and it's not always reliable, but you can have periods where you've got people who maybe their first language is not English, and just trying to understand what they're saying can be difficult. I have to understand too that many culturally, for many Indigenous peoples, English isn't always their first language. That there can be other language that can be their own Indigenous language that has been taught more in preschools and schools. But you can look at language barriers and need for interpreters and translators, especially. Some of the teaching materials are not, we use the term, we don't mean to use it in a judgmental way, but they're very Southern. You'll have a picture of a family, and you got dad on a tractor, and we're talking about forests. It doesn't always translate. So having good teaching materials can be challenging. Housing can vary in terms of quality. Affordability is huge, and just availability. I think a lot of us have in our different communities around the world, certainly in North America, are seeing the housing markets doing all kinds of interesting things. Parenting support, so I mentioned the pregnancy reach group that Josie went, but the parenting supports can sometimes be available, sometimes not be available. There to make them available. But then if you have learning difficulties, and it's a very language-based teaching, or here's the manual you need to read with all 89 pages of it, with no pictures and just really densely packed, that's hard. So how do you adapt some of those teaching materials for people who have learning challenges? And social access. So one of the ways to connect with people is through employment or through leisure and recreational activities. And availability, again, can vary from community to community. I want to give you an analogy for my tree, social support network. And I don't have a really nice picture here, but just imagine. If each of us identifies as a tree, you are a tree. The roots are family. The trunk is your identity, your well-being. That's you. You're the trunk. The branches are our social connections, friends, acquaintances, coworkers, people we've gone to school with, professionals, neighbors, on, branches. The leaves reflect the health of our relationships. Growth is developmental, and it requires nurturing, tending, sometimes pruning. Some relationships will blossom and flourish. Others will wither and fall away. That's life. There are people who have relationships that go on for what seems like an eternity, and others, they come and go with the wind. Some are sustained, some are ephemeral. Just an image when you're thinking of yourself or thinking of individuals. The sadder story. Herman has an intellectual disability, very involved in his community. He had employment. He had, I think he went to 2 churches because he loved to socialize. He had people in his community knew him, and they, again, looked for him. He was a very friendly man, very easygoing, just very much a part of his community. And he met a young woman who had a physical disability, and they had a baby together. Unfortunately, she had some major difficulties coping, and as a consequence, Child Protection Services became involved. And what they saw with Herman was a very capable man with an intellectual disability, who asked him if he wanted to parent his baby. He said yes, yeah, I want to do that. And they left him with his baby. And he made a decision that was a poor choice. He self-disclosed it. He was very open about it. It was something he knew he shouldn't have done, but he did. And the baby was taken into care, and he was heartbroken. He loved his son, and to be able to continue to have contact with his son, he had to agree to pretty close to, it became like annual, it became once a year. For a while, there was a bit more regular contact, and it wasn't his doing, it was the nature of the care arrangement that occurred. He, again, very much part of his community. And one of the things he did, and I want to bring this up because I think sometimes we miss this. Too often people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are forgotten when it comes to volunteering. That they have the capacity to do what others do and get the satisfaction you get from volunteering. So what Herman did on his own was he went to a senior center and he offered to volunteer. It was a volunteer agency in his community. It was a small one. And he went there first and said, and they said, well, where would you like to help me? He said, with older people. And he was incredibly reliable. He would go every 2 weeks, and it was a particular man he would visit, and they talk, and they eased each other's loneliness. One of the things that Herman was very skilled at, he'd learned from his dad, was fishing. And that was a connector for him. So by fishing, he was able to talk with other people. And now you have to understand, Northern British Columbia, there are a lot of people who fish. So it was something that you could have a conversation. And sometimes he'd go fishing with someone else, another person in the community, or an individual with a developmental disability. It was something that connected him, and he felt really good about it. He also he was pretty skilled to throw darts, and there was a group, and it wasn't segregated. It wasn't just for people who have disabilities. It was for anyone. If you can hit that target, you're welcome to join us. And he would do that. He would do that weekly. I used to tease him about how he was doing so many things. He had an enviable social life. But the one part of it that had broken down was being a parent and being able to, he had a dream. And his dream was one day his son would knock on his door in the future and say, hey, Dad, sadly it was never to be, because Herman died and never had his dream fulfilled. But yeah, we have to always look at those kinds of opportunities that are missed. When do social supports gather? When are they suddenly available? And they're there for celebrations. And it can go in different ways. I remember a couple who married and invited, and I was delighted, who had intellectual and developmental disabilities, and they invited people who'd worked with them and others. Like, it was a really fascinating group to their wedding. It was a cross-section of the community, and it was an honor to be asked to be there. So celebration, birth of a baby, having children, crisis, catastrophe, something terrible happens, people will gather and come in and offer support. If they know how to do that, if they even know your first name. The other thing that can cause connections, it changes, stressful events. And the challenge for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities is there's not always, if they're invisible, if they're not seen, if they're isolated from others, people don't know when to offer that kind of help, or bring a pie to the door, or give you the or celebrate and send flowers, or like it. It's getting them, helping them become as visible as possible. What are the motivators? So motivators can be for any adult, wanting to be accepted, again, not being judged, not being told what they can't do, all the you're not good enough. It's a strength-based. You're who you are, and that matters. And I'll accept you on those terms, not make it all conditional. Other motivators, the need for food, the need for money, financial security, being able to be employed and actually have be able to do what others do, be able to buy things, whether necessities or go wild and be pure. access to transportation, and for children, access to good child health care, and again, be able to ensure safety. Think about how you can link those things. Think about how, if you're looking at potential community supports, those motivators, the person's going to want to do something about those. But again, not to force it, but what are contact points where potential relationships could be built? It could get someone to go through the door, and then some things, and some good things could come from it. What I'd like you to think about, and I'm conscious of time, but what I'd like you to think about is, in a community, and you're looking at potential contact points, contact people. And this is, I just gave some examples. So I would ask you to kind of look further and in your own communities and say, okay, maybe there's this, maybe there's this. So when it comes to food, and there's a need, my examples, food banks, co-ops, I mentioned the pregnancy outreach and support groups, again, around children and children's nutrition, community kitchens, Christmas hampers, these things that were in my area in Northern British Columbia, and think about your area. So what kind, there could be some different attractions, and feel free to share your own examples. Social, again, faith-based groups, parenting groups. Again, sometimes tricky because you have to look at the learning styles involved, and can you make some accommodations so a person can feel part of those parenting groups, but some of the teaching can be invaluable. And again, just those anecdotes, these stories where you talk about, this is what being a parent feels like. And I've had that happen to me too, and it wasn't I silly, So sometimes we set up parents to be more perfect than perfect. We demand more from them. You have an intellectual disability, you have to raise the bar way too high, which is unfair. And so when you connect with other parents who can say, yeah, I had that happen. This is what I did. This is what I learned from it. Or I can give you this idea, or I've got some, my child has outgrown these clothes. Would you like some of his? Because we want them to go to a good home. So those kinds of contacts, if you can facilitate those happening, they can be incredible, because those are the informal supports that matter so much. Looking at, what do you like doing? What do you like doing for recreation? Do you throw darts? Do you, I was a young man who was working with not too long ago, and he loved soccer. He loved soccer. And he had learned that in school. And he actually had become and accepted because of his skills as part of a team. And then when he was an adult in his community, he looked for a men's soccer group, and it became, again, a connector. And when someone can do something with some degree of skill, there's a lot more acceptance. Hey, you're part of our group. Group stuff can be difficult for some people many people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, again, because that fear of judgment and fear of not being good enough. But when you got the ability, and someone else sees that they can become very accommodating. They want you to be part of what they're doing. Classes, community socials, feasts. Again, in Indigenous communities, that could be a very huge part of the culture, socials, and being able to be part of that becomes important. Financial, thrift stores. A lot of adults I work with haunt the thrift stores and the new to use. Like they find all kinds of bargains there. And we'll share them and say, look what I found. This is really great. Garage sales. And so there are those kinds of things too to look at. Shelter sometimes, again, the isolation becomes scary, because when there's any kind of abuse, where is a shelter for women? And how would you access that? So there's these safety features that become important too. Mentioned transportation, a little bit on healthcare. Professional supports. Professionals are not meant to be forever in a person's life. They're not meant to take care of everything. Their involvement may be short-lived. You begin as a stranger. You're not known, and you have to earn trust. You can't just walk in. Now with your mandate, especially if you're involved in child protection, you have a very specific mandate, and there's certain parameters to that. But on the other hand, if you're wanting the person to do well, and I'll give you a quick example, is there was a couple who, 2 children, 2 very large dogs, and their home, and I'm not wanting this to sound judgmental, but it was chaotic. You'd walk in and things were all over, and TV was on, and it was loud, and it was like a 3-ring circus. But you work with it a bit at a time. You try to make some connecting to some informal supports to help them kind of sort things out if they want to, because in the end, they're going to make the choices for the most part. However, there was one professional, every time she entered that home, she would go straight to the broom closet, the closet, take out the vacuum cleaner and begin vacuuming. Now, I don't know what you feel about that, but I know the parents were embarrassed and they felt humiliated, and they were glad when she stopped coming. So you're a guest. Yeah, how's your mandate? You're an intrusion, and you need to find a way to make that develop a partnership and work together. So if you're going to make suggestions about linkages to community support groups, I'm not going to listen to you if I don't trust you. Yeah. If you're judging me, I'm going to tune you out. So professionals need to be conscious of their roles. Are they there to be a chauffeur? Are they there to, or a friend? What does that mean? Can I call you at midnight on Sunday when I'm feeling sad? Can I have your personal number? Like, what is your role? And defining that very clearly in the beginning becomes super important. Informal supports and people who are choosing to be in your life and you're choosing to be with them. And where it can be difficult is if people who have been or would place your children at risk are coming to the door and their family members. And it's been made very clear that if they are present in your home with your children would be returned to care. Now, that's all very nice and it sounds very cut and dried. It's not. This can be a family, or it can be somebody who you'd had a previous intimate relationship with, and now you're being told to cut them off. And for many individuals who have intellectual and developmental disabilities, being assertive in those situations, extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. So training and support around that becomes important. Or what are they getting from the people who are banging on the door? Is there someone else who can replace those needs? Someone else who they can satisfy that need for affiliation and not be as lonely? So if it's somebody who was abusive, and that's the best you've got, you're going to open the door. So we need to help with that. And there's some good teaching that goes with that that we need to be mindful of. And again, conscious of time. There's a formula for building a relationship. This does not guarantee a friendship, but it lays the groundwork for it, for the potential of developing a friend. 3 parts to the formula. 1, common interests. Common interests. I mean, I'm going to spend time with them because we like doing the same thing. That simple. Common interests. One of the things I encourage parents with their children and children who have IDD is don't set limits on what they can learn. create opportunities for them to discover what they like doing best. So that could be, and there can be, again, there are barriers. So there could be financial barriers, there could be access barriers, but there can be opportunities to learn, to take music lessons, dance lessons, swimming. Team sports can be difficult for some, but again, there's some individual sports and recreation and leisure. On a personal note, when my children were younger, my youngest son was at the time maybe 12, and there was a boy at school who had an intellectual disability, and he liked playing, well, video games. Again, the great connector. And my son didn't even think twice about it. He would invite him over, you know, and we'd make sure we had a big pizza. His friend was a good eater. And they would have a good time together. It never came up. It wasn't about, you know, does he have learning needs or is there stigma? No, he's good at playing these games, and we're going to play them together and have a grand time. So again, I think for all of us to think about giving our children opportunity to have access to others who they may not always have, and just not make a big fuss about it. I think it's important, again, to develop those interests or those skills, so you've got something in common, and others will, again, be more accepting. So common interests, opportunity. You're not gonna have a relation with somebody if you don't get to see them. If you're not in the same place together, and frequency. You have to do it enough to work on that relationship. And some of those relationships will turn into friendships. One last sad story. There was a young fellow in a community who was going to a private school, and he knew, all the kids in his school pretty much grew up together. So they would go grade to grade to grade to grade to grade. And it was decided, and they were great. They knew him. He did a number of things with them. They did a number of social activities. He was getting to the teenagers, and he was part of everything. His parents were given advice that they took. They felt he needed an extra year in his high school. And he stayed. His friends moved on. They went away. They went to different colleges, and they went to other jobs, and none of them left the community, and he was left behind, and he was crushed because his social network was gone, and there was very little connecting that occurred. So sometimes on holidays, some would drop by and say hi, but it wasn't the same thing, and it was a huge adjustment. So sometimes when we're looking at transitions in life, we need to look at the social implications and how that can affect a person. And as parents made the best choice under the circumstances that they felt they could make, and didn't realize how that would impact upon him. But again, it wasn't a totally sad story because he did make some connections there. All right. Last thing that I want to leave you with is social access. Professionals and caregivers can have meaningful roles in facilitating a parent's personal support networks. Definitely. Most people like to help, and I think I just want to underscore that. Most people like to be helpful. We feel good when we're helping someone else, and we'll welcome the opportunity, but don't always know when there is a need. Facilitation and linkages to other social networks can generate social access. It doesn't just happen without some history and practice and experience. And again, it's creating those opportunities in childhood and as youth for people who have intellectual and developmental disability. Give them those opportunities earlier. The more we restrict their involvement in their community, the more the risk of social isolation. So it takes trial and error. We've all gone through it, and we learn from others. So it is a process, it takes time, and it's founded on earning trust. The outcome may last a lifetime and not only benefits the parent and family, but their community too is enriched. Thank you for being part of the webinar. I see Chelsea is signaling me.
Thank you so much, Tom. If anybody has questions, feel free to still pop them into the chat. We have a little bit longer, although we'll, go ahead and end if we don't have any additional questions. But I really just wanted to extend my thanks to Tom for sharing with us today, and especially the use of all the real life stories and all your real life experiences with individuals and families. I think that really helps to make it real and connect those pieces. And you really, truly are a gifted storyteller. So thank you so much for being with us today. And thanks to everyone for attending. I know people often have to jump off as we get to the end of what may be people's lunch breaks or midday breaks. So I'm just gonna real quickly pop in the chat a follow-up survey. And again, as I'm talking, feel free to, if you have questions for Tom or for anybody, please feel free to pop them into the chat or raise your hand. And while we're doing that, I'm just gonna go back over to my kind of end of slideshow. So I just put a survey link in the chat. We also just wanted to make you aware at TASP of some of our upcoming trainings. So we have some in-depth trainings this fall, one around working successfully with parents with IDD coming up in late September, and a new training around trauma, parenting, and intellectual developmental disabilities, and intra-agency puzzle. And we're really excited. We just got approved for social work CEUs for our working successfully training. So we'll be updating that on the website, and we have CEUs, social work CEUs as well pending that we expect to get for the trauma training, knowing that many people need those. So just wanted to share that. It's not on the website yet, but that will be up there shortly. You can also now become a member of TASP and get access to all of these archived webinars, including Tom's from today. So if you know anybody who missed it and really would appreciate viewing it, archived webinars are available for our members, along with a slew of other resources that we've created, and just a kind of committed community of like-minded professionals and parents, all doing the same work. So like I said, we'll send a follow-up survey in an email, and you'll also get another copy, just in case you didn't get it, of that companion PDF that Tom was following today, along with a certificate of attendance for those of you who need that. Again, you'll be on our mailing list now, but please spread the word. We really are trying to get information out there about us and the work that we do. So if you have any questions or there's anything else that we can assist with, you're welcome to email us at info@achancetoparent.net. So just wanted to, I see lots of thanks to Tom in the chat. So thanks again to everybody for coming, and we hope to see you at our next webinar, which is coming up in November, I believe, or at one of our fall trainings. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
You're welcome.
Thanks, Chelsea. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you.